Which inner voice do you keep pretending isn't there? We've all got a little voice in our heads that makes itself known in one way or another. So let's stop pretending that it isn't there and actually have the courage to stop and to actually listen to it. And yes, this might be confronting in the short term, but it could also be extremely fulfilling in the long term. You never know, it might be much easier and kinder than you first thought as well. We'll only find out by actually slowing down and listening to it and hearing what it actually has to say. So in this video, we're going to do quite a lot of things. Firstly, we're going to introduce the idea of sub-personalities. And then we'll use an example to show how we can start to identify them. Then what we're going to try to do is to encourage these parts of us to let us know what they need from us, as well as encourage these parts of us to communicate with each other as well. And also why, with all of this, we need courage and commitment on this journey as well. And then, as always, I've got a lot of book recommendations for you as well. So, just to set the context for this, we need to introduce an important term, and that is this one. That is sub-personalities. So, it might seem strange to think about ourselves as multiple separate personalities rather than just one big personality. But this is a very common and everyday experience, and you'll be able to recognize it in yourself straight away. So, for example, just consider some of these. Are you exactly the same person at home and at work, or are there different parts of you that you emphasize in one place compared to another? And then let's say instead, when you answer the phone to an unknown number, do you speak like you always do, or do you have a telephone voice? And when you're making an important decision, do you find it always easy, or do you find like one part of you wants one thing whilst another part of you wants another? So these are all completely normal experiences, and there's nothing weird or wrong or strange about being, to some extent, in an internal conflict with yourself. We rely on different aspects of ourselves depending on what the situation demands, and over time we naturally practice some of these traits more than others, and they just become more comfortable and more familiar. So without overthinking it, we form habits and these little mini personalities start to appear. And then we just act them out on autopilot. So you might refer to some of these different parts of you by different names. So you might call them things like the inner child or the inner critic. But for the sake of this lesson, I'm just going to call them sub-personalities overall. And we're going to use the definition from this book of the same name by John Rowan, because there's a lovely, simple definition in here to help illustrate all of this. And it's as early as page 8. Nice and straightforward, just this one line. So a working definition for subpersonalities: a semi-permanent and semi-autonomous region of the personality capable of acting as a person. So let's break this down a little bit just to make it nice and clear. So it is, if I just remove these for now, it is semi-permanent in that you've practiced being this type of person so often in a specific situation that it feels natural to call it you. So it doesn't matter if this was conscious or unconscious, it's still a habit that has been practiced so often that it feels familiar. And it's semi-autonomous in that you don't have to consciously think about it anymore and put on this act, but instead you naturally just adopt this role and you hold those values or you act with those characteristics. So it's autonomous in that this part of you freely comes online rather than being forced to or by someone else who makes you be that way. So with all this in mind, you still exist as the big unifying collective, but it's much easier to think about yourself as a community of selves rather than just one solid mass that moves around from situation to situation. And if we go back to that main question that we started with, there might be some inner voices or thoughts or emotions that we'd rather not pay attention to because it disrupts this internal sense of community and inner peace, or at the very least this apparent inner peace. But we need to accept that this little voice is here and it's not going anywhere unless we listen to it. And this might be challenging. It might cause some disruption in the short term, but the alternative is potential catastrophe in the long term. So we need to be brave enough to slow down and stop and say, okay, who is this within me that is trying to get my attention? And what is it that you want? And what do you need? And what are your worries and what are your concerns? So with all this in mind, let's simplify all of this down with a few specific sub-personalities. And it might help at this point to think about a specific problem that you are facing. So by all means, as we are doing this, be thinking about how this might apply to you in your life as I illustrate it with an example on here. So this might be a decision that you need to make, might be a worry in the back of your mind. It might just be something you need to think about. So I'll illustrate it with an example because it's a nice little meta moment opportunity in terms of planning this video itself. So the problem I'm facing right now, and I'm going to continue to face in the future as well, is that I want to plan and record a video on parts work, but I'm not quite sure where to take it because it's just such a big topic. And I don't know if anyone will even pay attention to it either. So already, if I just stop there, just by thinking about that level of the problem, there's at least 5 specific sub-personalities that are all giving me their opinions all at once in my head. So straight away, we've got this realist in me. So the realistic, that's just the realistic opinion with it all. So he's just saying, just write a short outline, press record, and see how it goes. It'll probably be okay. So the realist isn't really overthinking very much. It's just saying, make a short outline, press record, see how it goes. But as soon as I think that, the pessimist comes online in me and it starts to doubt that straight away. Now, I don't have to sit there and encourage its opinion. It just automatically turns up in my mind. That's what I mean when I say things like semi-autonomous in that definition. I don't choose this voice. It just comes up as soon as I start to think in a realistic way. That's when the pessimist makes itself known. That's when it starts to come online if we use that example from before with this woman. So the pessimist is saying things like, what do you mean just press record? It's going to turn out terribly. You need to think this through, otherwise people are going to call you out and this is just going to be an entire waste of time. But again, if I really slow down and I pay attention to it, the optimist is there as a bit of a counterbalance in my head, and he's got a reply as well. So again, I'm not trying to think of a reply. I'm not trying to force one. There is just another voice in my head that naturally doubts that pessimistic voice who doubted the realist. And he's saying things like, well, we don't know that for certain. We've done quite a lot of reading and we've taught for 10 years now. So just trust the process and it'll all work out. And chances are someone will gain something from this, even if it does come out as a bit of a mess. So let's just at the very least give it a go. Now, I'm going to give you a quick little side note here. One very common sub-personality to be aware of is the inner critic. And you might give that a different name, but it's just referring to that doubting voice that criticizes you no matter what. I've already made another video on what this specific voice is trying to say and why, so I'd encourage you to watch that video if you're interested, rather than me repeat it all here. So rather than include that as a specific sub-personality in this video, I'm going to acknowledge it, but I am going to put it to one side because I don't want to introduce too many elements into just one lesson unnecessarily. So even as I'm saying all this though, there is definitely another voice that's trying to make itself known, which is separate from that inner critic. And it's going much, much further. So I'm going to call this, for the sake of this video, the super pessimist. So it's not just saying, don't record this video because it won't be very good. It's going much, much further than that still. It's saying, this video won't be very good and it's going to ruin your reputation and people will see you for who you are and they're going to give you a lot of hate in the comments for it. So just give up now because you're not resilient enough to deal with all of this and a lot more as well. But I'm just going to stop it here for the sake of this to make it practical. What we're doing here is we're just identifying these voices. I'm not trying to reply to it. I'm not trying to agree or disagree or rationalize it. I'm just going to accept that voice is there in my head. And again, just with all of this, I did say there was 5 different voices. If I really slow down, there's a little quiet voice that's there as well. And I've got to pay close attention to this, but it is actually very positive and it's very encouraging. It's trying to just boost me along a little bit. So I'm going to call this one the over-optimist. There's a bit of a balance to the super pessimist. So just like the super pessimist went quite far negatively, this one's doing the same but positively. And that's that little voice in my head which is saying, this video could be the one. People might love it. And then you might go viral and then you might get rich. You might get tons of comments saying how much they love these lessons. And if I really pay close attention and I really just have free reign, it might say things like, you might get recognized by the king and you might get an MBE for your services in education and so on. So it's not just optimism, but it's this sort of fantastical, over the top level of optimism, if I really dared to dream. In the same way that the super pessimist would bring everything down and just doubt literally everything. So I could go on, but I just want to make some points clear with all of this so far. So regardless of my opinion about what each of these voices are actually saying, all of them need to have their voices heard. Because they've each got legitimate motivations and worldviews and concerns and fears and worries and hopes and everything else from their specific standpoint. I can't reduce one down to the other, and I shouldn't either. In the same way that I can't reduce one family member down to another, or one friend to another. So we need to not just hear their stories, but what's even more important is making sure that each of these sub-personalities hears the stories of the other sub-personalities. That's the only way that we're going to come up with some kind of agreement in the long run. So you might picture this as a boardroom or as a court or as a living room with everybody sitting around. Picture it in whatever way works for you. But just to re-emphasize that last point, each of these sub-personalities needs to make it clear to the other sub-personalities what it needs to say. So I'll give you a couple of questions here to help make this as practical as possible. So in terms of this, in fact, I'm going to put all these labels back out because it might make it a little bit easier to illustrate this. So if we think about this in this way, which order did I have it in? I think it was about that order, wasn't it? So you could think about it as, what does the pessimist need to say in order to not feel ignored? And who does he need to say it to? And as I'm saying that, how might the optimist reply? And once that answer has come through, how might the super pessimistic response, or what might that super pessimistic response be when it hears the optimist saying this? And then how can the realist step in and try to manage this conflict? And how might the over-optimist view this idea? So it's questions like this which are directed that can be particularly useful. Just because it's realistic from the point of view of the realist doesn't mean that the over-optimist won't view it in a pessimistic way. And let's not pretend that we can't all be doomsdayers and naysayers at certain times. And also, let's not pretend that we don't also fantasize about how amazing things could go if a really specific chain of events happened. If we don't hear all of these individual voices, then we'll just bury over them and repress them or suppress them. And that's equally true for both the higher voices and the lower voices. So, like I say, we need to have their voices heard and their intentions understood and their fears and their concerns recognised. And that goes, just to make this really, really clear, really repeat that point, it goes just as much for the over-optimist as it does for the super pessimist. We very rarely ask, how well could this actually go if we dared to dream? So let's bring in that over-optimist until it becomes second nature to us. If you're a fan of psychosynthesis, by the way, then this is a really practical way of broadening the middle unconscious. And it's letting the higher and lower unconscious become slowly integrated in your awareness. Again, I'm just trying to leave a couple of breadcrumbs here just to show you how these ideas can cross over. And on a page 198 in this book, if I just put it on the screen, I'll also take a picture of this and put it on the screen as well. There's a really good set of questions in here to help flesh out and get to know some of these parts of you. So I'll leave a picture on the screen if you want to use that to help to get to know them a little bit better. But for me, what I've found useful is making really explicit connections between each of these sub-personalities. Now, I practice quite often active imagination to make this clear, which is rather than just passively daydreaming, taking an active approach towards it and engaging with these thoughts as they turn up. So I'm not thinking so much, oh, what would the pessimist say? I'm instead waiting for the pessimist to make his voice known of his own accord and then encouraging him to keep talking. And I know that might sound like a really strange idea at first, but it's about trying to get to the root of the concern or the desire or the motivation or the fear and letting the different parts of me come up with a plan. So, for example, if I was to draw this out, it would be putting these 5 sub-personalities. If I just sort of draw it like this. We had the realist, optimist, pessimist, super pessimist, and over optimist. So what we're doing is, if I was to draw them all out into little circles like this, it's letting them one by one talk directly to another specific subpersonality, and then bringing in more voices one at a time so that everyone has had a chance to speak to each other. So let's say you start with the realist and he speaks to each of these as ideas. And then from here, we can then move on to the optimist, see what the optimist might say in reply and how he might talk to other different subpersonalities, and so on. Same with the pessimist over here. So basically what we're doing is we're making lots and lots of connections as we start with one of these points and we move it around to the rest of them. And already you can see, as I'm trying to draw this out, it becomes a bit of a mess as you sort of draw it in this way. But the idea is everyone is getting a chance to speak to each other. So once I've done this for one personality, I just move on to another and repeat it in the same way. Now, if you like an idea like that, I've very, very much oversimplified it there. But you might enjoy something like internal family systems because that makes it even more explicit. And if we bring this back round to our initial question of which inner voice do you keep pretending isn't there, what we're doing here is stopping that pretending element and learning to hear the voice of those parts of us that we're not used to hearing. And then making this ongoing commitment, this promise to ourselves, that we're going to start listening to that voice a lot more. So let's tie all this together with the importance of courage, because that's what's really underpinning all of this. What we're trying to do is try to find some meaning in all this. So we can quite rightly refer to this question around subpersonalities as an existential situation or an existential question. Now, that's just a fancy philosophical way of talking about existence, or in our case, the importance and the significance of all these voices existing. It's a call to action for us that we must have the courage and the right attitude towards life to make all of this worthwhile. So if I go back to those pictures that I was using before, this is going to be much, much easier if we think about this as how we are united internally, but it needs to be an ongoing commitment, not just this abstract idea of life would be better if this was different, or life would be easier if I wasn't so pessimistic. Because all we're doing with a statement like that is denying a part of us that exists and naively wishing for life just to be different. We're not going to get very far by excluding parts of us, or by distorting facts, or ignoring emotions. So we need to have this commitment and this dedication to voluntarily face this inner conflict with courage and with curiosity. Talking about commitment and actually being committed are two very different things. So within existentialism, we might think about something like this as, how can you embrace your freedom knowing that it will also bring about responsibility? You can't have one without the other. And for every yes, there's going to be many more no's. So there must be an underlying courage and willingness to try to unify all of this together. Now, we've covered quite a lot in this lesson, so I do want to give you just a few book recommendations just to take this further in a lot of different ways if you are interested. So, obviously, we've got Subpersonalities by John Rowan. I've talked about this book and the ideas in it quite a lot in this lesson already, so I'm not going to go into any more detail on that one for now. And if you wanted a more structured and technical approach to working with these different parts of you, or subpersonalities, then you might enjoy Internal Family Systems by Richard Schwartz. Now, in our previous video, we also looked at the idea of making change by understanding opposites and looking to reconcile them so that we can actually learn to integrate them. So that could be useful again here. So I recommended Ordinary Ecstasy, also by John Rowan, who wrote Subpersonalities. So this could be useful to take this a little bit further again. Now, if you wanted to get to know two specific subpersonalities better, then I would recommend Embracing Your Inner Critic by Hal and Sidra Stone, as well as The Drama of Being a Child by Alice Miller. So understanding the dynamics and the motivations of that inner critical voice, as well as listening to your inner child, is definitely going to help to paint this bigger picture of what's going on internally. So I would also recommend these two if those are particularly relevant subpersonalities that you think might be useful as well. But I am aware, as I'm saying this, that for some people watching this, it might be quite a difficult thing to confront especially if you've had quite a difficult childhood, in which case I would recommend starting with this book, which is Homecoming by John Bradshaw. So if you don't feel particularly connected to optimistic energies, or that you can't even hear what they're trying to say at all, then this could be a good book to start raising that self-esteem and by learning to champion that voice. Now, there's a ton of books that's going to pull the learning from this lesson in so many different directions, but I just hope that some of these are going to be useful for you. I am going to leave this one here for now, and we'll pick up on this idea of subpersonalities again another time. But just for now, learn to identify them, hear what they have to say, and then encourage those parts of you to communicate with those other parts, just like I was drawing up on that diagram from before. You'll find that making decisions is going to be much, much easier if you have some sense of inner peace and harmony instead of conflict. Now, we've covered quite a lot in that lesson, so I'm going to leave it here, and I will see you around in a future lesson. See you then.